Okay, so welcome back. There's some familiar faces here. It's exciting to see you all return for more and for more sharing. It gives us a lot of encouragement and makes us feel like we're on the right track here. I want to introduce myself as well as the rest of the board of the Florida End of Life Doula Association. So my name is Lynn Principe. I'm the acting chair of the board at this time. We also have Shanti Vani, vice president. We have William here from Gainesville. I think Terry Coretta just popped on. We have Keely from Ormond Beach and Sharon Collier. She's not on the call. So we represent the board of the Florida End of Life Doula Association. And I just wanted to thank you all for being here and just let you know that all the work that we're doing right now is for the benefit of doulas all over the state. And that just ripples outward throughout the country. And the more that we learn and grow together, the more we can further this beautiful work. And that's really our why and why we're here. And so we're grateful that you're here for that conversation as well. And for those of you that were able to contribute financially to this call, we really appreciate that. That just goes towards us building our networks and our websites and all the ways that we can start connecting one another even further. So yes, thank you so much for that. We have an awesome guest today. She's not in Florida. She's in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, in fact. Her name is Isabelle Knight. She is an end of life doula and a web designer. So she's got wisdom in both of those areas. So I'm going to hand it over to Isabelle and she'll share all that she knows about what's important in websites when it comes to our doula work.
Thank you so much, Lynn.
You're welcome.
So yeah, my name is Isabelle. I have a company called The Death Designer. And so I do design both in terms of like your traditional design. I do human-centered design, instructional design. So I design online courses and I do web and graphic design. So some of the things that I talk about today, a lot of what I try to do is teach people to fish, right? And so I'm going to talk a lot about what are some tips that you need to keep in mind when dealing with, if you're making your own website, and then if you're looking for a web designer, like what are some general principles to keep in mind? And I would like for this session, I like all of my presentations to be really interactive. So one thing that I wanted to ask everyone to do right off the bat is if you could post in the chat the link to a end of life doula website or a death care website that you really like. I'm going to have a section where we're going to like basically do an audit of these websites and talk a little bit about what makes these websites successful. Like, why do we like them? Like, what are the design principles at play? And if you want to post your own website, if you want some feedback in real time, any brave souls are welcome to do that too. Although I will say, it is your public facing brand. So like, ideally, we want to get everyone to a point where there's like totally no shame in like posting your website. I feel like often when I do that, people are like, oh no, it's not ready, but it's like, this is what everyone is going to see about you. So I'll just put that out there. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and go through some of my tips at the very beginning. And then we'll go through some of your websites and you can see kind of what's going on in a lot of these different design areas. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Can everyone see my screen? Yeah, we're good. Okay. So I just have 6 basic tips that I'm, going to talk about. They're basically just web design principles, like fonts, colors, images are like the main things that you need to think about, because that's at the end of the day, all that a website is, right? Is essentially just composed of these different components, right? So whenever I talk about fonts, the main thing, it's funny because when you look at a lot of these death care websites, people are really into the quirky fonts in the death care space. So I'm going to give you a tip in terms of like, okay, so I just pulled up like the Death Wives website, for example. And I'm going to show you quickly how to go to any website and figure out what fonts they're using if you like a font that someone is using on their website. So if you're in Chrome, you can hit the inspect button if you left click, or if you right click and then hit inspect. You can go to this, it will open this developer panel, and you can see here's the font style that they're using, right? And the font family. So they're using this font called Pearl here. And often these kind of like quirkier fonts, if you just go into Canva, Canva is a tool that is a free tool that a lot of people use. It's browsers based. And Canva has a lot of these more quirky fonts if that's something that you're into. So like I just usually have a page open in Canva where I will test out different fonts. And so let's see if this font that they're using is over in Canva. So, oh, I already searched it. So they have Pearl in here. So, you know, this is one way for you to just like figure out what different websites are using when it comes to fonts. And I posted, I'm going to share the presentation later, but you can also use font finders online. So if you take a screenshot of a particular font that you see, you can plug that screenshot into a font finder online. It will also tell you what fonts are, you know, closest to the one that you're looking for. And I also recommend Google Libraries or Google Fonts as a free font library, because often you have to pay for them. But that is also one of the benefits of using Canva, is that they pay for a lot of those fonts for you. So that's some tips around the fonts. My second tip is around colors. And so one thing to pay attention to when it comes to colors on your website is the contrast, right? So the number one thing that I'm often looking for when I kind of audit people's websites is what amount of contrast are people using? Because that is, I mean, that this is something that should be used in terms of making your websites as accessible as possible all the time. But with end of life doulas, it's particularly important because, you know, a lot of your clients might be, it might have difficulty with their eyesight. And so you can use contrast checkers. If you just Google contrast checker, this is like one of the first websites that will come up. And what you have to do is like plug in a hex code, and that will allow you to figure out whether or not it's compliant with the 508. And 508 is just like the main regulation around accessibility in terms of internet guidelines. And then there's also color pickers that will allow you to just like very quickly come up with a font or a set of color palettes. And you can, if you like a particular color, for example, this website is called, it was called Colors, and you can lock some of them. And if you press the space bar on this website, it will continue coming up with other colors that will go with that color. And so you can just like keep locking them until you come up with another, you know, the color palette that you like. So that's just one tip that I have in terms of like coming up with the right colors for your brand. Because there's a lot of color theory that can go into figuring out what colors are best to go with each other. So that's fonts and colors. In terms of images, one thing that I really like to, you know, show people is like when you go to some of these, like say, go to Wix, right? And you look at a lot of the templates that they have, if you'll notice, a lot of the things that make all of these websites look really good, almost all of them are heavily reliant on having big, high resolution images. I would say literally all of these, except for perhaps like this one, which is like still AI, you know, this is still computer generated, so it's not a photo. But if you have access to a professional photographer who can take some photos either of you or, you know, whatever you're going for in terms of your vibe. So it could be, you know, you working with clients, you know, there's a lot of forest imagery going on in the end of life space. So that's something that really makes your website stand out. One page that I like to use for inspiration is this page called One Page Love. And it's just like a huge collection of these single page websites. And a lot of them are just like, they're so reliant on images. If you just look as you scroll through these, the ratio of image to text, like it's very, very image heavy almost all the time. And, if you look at some of the popular, death care companies, like this is Recompose's website, it's same thing, like very, very minimal use of words. Every so often you'll have like, a paragraph of text, but for the most part, it's all very image based. And so one of the things that I recommend is if you don't have a lot of high resolution images, you can use these stock image websites like Unsplash and Pexels. Although I will say when I see a lot of people's websites, I can almost always identify like if they're using stock images where they came from. So one recommendation I typically give to people is if you have your own photos, or if you know someone who is a photographer, even if a lot of it is just abstract photos, but you can get them high resolution without using one of these, that's often a really good way to go, because that it's not going to be something that like comes up everywhere in everyone else's websites, because that's one of the hardest things here is like making sure your website stands out. So that's my note on the images. And then in terms of icons, I really recommend whenever you have a block of text, like using an icon with it, just because images really allow people to, remember things better, basically. And so there are free icon libraries out there. One that I use often is called Flat Icon. And so they have icons, and then they also have like these sticker packs as well. And obviously a lot of these are not necessarily going to be, appropriate to what you all are looking for, but some of them are like, there's so many packs in here that a lot of them, can definitely be useful. One recommendation I always make to people is just make sure that your icons that you use, and actually like if you use any non-photo images, make sure that they're PNG vector files and not JPG files. And the reason for that is because a vector file is basically like it's not a collection of pixels. It's essentially just like, a vector line, so that you can zoom in, like you could zoom into this, any of the things that I use on this deck, and like zoom into it forever, and it will never lose resolution. So that's kind of the purpose of using those vector files. And then, yeah, so I would say there's a lot of people when they come to me, they're like, oh, I want like, a whole, like all of these fancy things. And what I always caution people is that one thing that makes websites really, really usable is predictability, right? So like a lot of these websites, like, this is Olivia Barham's website, like they have all of the same basic principles at play, right? You have like the top navigation, you have usually some kind of banner in the middle, right? Like people need to be able to go to your website and know where to find what they're looking for quickly. And so like using that same format that like, almost all of these websites are using is, a key to like making sure that it is, easy for people to use. And then my last tip, and I have some design inspiration. I showed you the One Page Love page already, but there's also this page called Dribble, which designers use all the time, and they have like animation, illustrations, etc. And so they have a web design section where obviously these are designed by very, very highly paid designers, so these are often like more than what the average web designer can do, but they can serve as inspiration for like, how can I take some elements from this and apply it to what I'm trying to accomplish with my own website, right? So I included some of those. And then my last tip is I always tell people where I get this knowledge from at the beginning. So if you're interested in learning how to create websites, now this is like the most like deep all of the different like coding boot camps, but this is where I learned all of my web design knowledge. Like almost every person out there who designs websites, just learned it from an online course. So I learned it from this Udemy course. And this is a course that, is basically just like the best of the best as far as I have ever encountered. So now I'm going to open it up for some questions, and then we can start going into some of these websites, and I can talk a little bit about what could use some improvement and what makes them successful. But does anyone have any questions so far? And you can just unmute yourself because I can't necessarily see everyone's video. Okay. So I'm just gonna paste some of these into the chat and just like give you my impressions. And these are the things that I'm going to do with your website. If that's something that you want, whenever I work with a client, I basically go through what they have already. And I say, okay, here's where things could use some work. And like, here's what I think you're doing super well, right? So in terms of like this Death Doula's website, one thing that I often note is that I personally have like a much larger screen than the average screen size. So for example, you might notice this like going with Grace's site, like they clearly only designed this website to be, 4 screens that are probably like 1920 by 1080 resolution, right? So like my screen, it's not totally optimized for this. So like one thing to pay attention to when you're designing these is make sure you're looking at all of the different formats that you possibly can in the viewfinder. So like, the phone size, the iPad size, like, the highest resolution screen that you can, because that's something that, is just a good web design principle generally. Because you'll see like, like Recompose, for example, like clearly you can view this on any size screen. But definitely always make sure to at least view it on mobile, because most people now are viewing websites, on their phone. So that's just something I wanted to note. And then I'm trying to think. So basically, like I wanted to just show you guys some examples of like, this is like Narinder's website. Overall, I think that the contrast should be higher, especially because a lot of people, like when you highlight, you can't see the text at all. So just like things like that, make sure you're paying attention to contrast. To go back to this Death Doula website, I think like up here, the contrast, like with this image, the top navigation is a little bit difficult to read. Because the image isn't high contrast enough with the white text. So like, that's something to keep in mind as you are, designing your website. Often also from a search engine optimization standpoint. So like basically getting your website to show up in Google and other search engines. It's really helpful to have a sitemap at the bottom. So like, that's one piece of advice that I would give to like whoever was designing this website, is that there's no sitemap at the bottom. And so the algorithms that are used to, like recommend this website in the Google search algorithm will not be able to find it as easily because there's no sitemap at the bottom. And I'll show you what that looks like. So like, let's see if the Recompose site has one. They actually don't really have a huge sitemap either. So like this kind of thing with all the links at the bottom. I'm pretty sure the Order of the Good Death has it. Yeah. So this is like a really robust sitemap. So like their SEO is probably really good. And I see that in the chat, there's a question. Liz, do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Yes, I'm sorry to interrupt your flow. It's very, very juicy, everything that you're saying.
Yeah, no worries.
It's very juicy. My question is, if I'm starting with a single page website, right, just the one page, as far as the contact information, do you recommend to put it at the top or at the bottom or both?
I think that if your primary goal, like the primary goal of this website, for example, for the Order of the Good Death, is not to have you contact them. So they don't have like any contact at the top. Like you have to go probably somewhere at the bottom that they have a contact us, button. But if you look at these like, you know, companies like Eternova, like their number one goal is to get you to contact them. So like you have a lot, like you'll see their website has like a ton of opportunities for you to contact them and like get started and, you know, initiate the process. So if your number one goal is for your website is to get them to contact you, like, yes, put as much redundancy as possible. Put one at the top, put one at the bottom, put one like, you know, in your cover, like whatever, wherever you feel most comfortable putting it, like put it in as many places as possible. That's your number one goal.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, so like I run the, you know, National Home Funeral Alliance website. We allow people to talk to us, but our number one goal for our website is to be a resource to people. So, you know, it all happens to, for most of what you all are trying to do, I would say that like probably that is going to be your number one goal, is just to get people to contact you. But like, you know, the Philly Death Doula Collective, their number one call to action is for you to donate to them, as opposed to, you know, reaching out and scheduling a, you know, them as to be your death doula. So, and I see Laura had a question. How do we know if it's good with iPhone versus Android? That's a great question. So I would say that for the most part, iPhone and Android are basically the same in terms of like, you know, how they process. It really just has to do with like the browser that you're using on them. And for the most part, it's not going to make a difference. So when you're in like Wix, for example, let me see if I have my editor open. It'll give you the option as you're editing to switch to mobile, and you can see exactly what it looks like on a phone. So yeah, the iPhone versus Android is not a big deal. It's just about like basically making sure the sizing and responsiveness works out well. And you can do that in like editors like this by like using these tools, like switching from desktop to mobile. But you can also really easily do that by just literally resizing your screen so that, you know, it's small. So like, you know, that's just sort of like the very easy shorthand way to do it. And just make sure it looks good when you make it really, you know, tall and narrow like this. Yeah, so the next one that I'll go to is this End of Life Doula LLC, and we'll check that one out. Oh, I guess I didn't copy it correctly. Okay, so let's see this one. Okay, cool. So, you know, there is a big banner at the top. I would put some site navigation at the top here because that's where most people are going to be looking for it if you have multiple pages. But if this is only one page, then that's totally cool. But it looks like I guess these are some resources pointing to other places. So it's good to have this, but it's also good, you know, if you do have multiple pages to include a sitemap. But in terms of like a contrast, and making sure everything looks accessible, I think this looks really good. And if we resize it, so one issue with this is that like the text is not responsively, basically when you resize the window, like it should get smaller so that you can continue to read it when you change the size. So like on mobile, this is probably not going to be super easy for people to you know, consume, just because half of the text is going to be cut off and they're going to have to scroll from side to side for like as they're trying to consume your content. So like that's one thing that I look out for. And you know, I also go through and just like make sure a lot of the links work. This, I think I would change, just because you have text over a transparency over more text. So having this text in the background really makes it difficult to read the text in the forefront. So I would either like tell this person to make this opacity 100% so that you don't see this text in the back showing through, or you know, make it a smaller box or something along those lines. So like, you know, that's one thing that I would advise this person. And then let's see, farewellfellowship.com. Okay, cool. So, yeah, there's a top navigation. There's a very clear call to action in terms of contact. And this is the events page. So like, let's just take a look at the actual homepage. So yeah, I think this looks really good. This is clearly like, you know, a very, very common sort of like Squarespace and Wix element that you'll see is like, you know, having these like there's often like these tombstone shapes or like, you know, things like that in these like the Philly Death Duel is one I think is very prominently like, you know, utilizes this sort of like masking shape, which I think is cool. I really like that. And yeah, there's like very high contrast. There's a lot of good use of visuals in this. And like, you know, it seems like this person had like a whole like illustrator come in or perhaps even just like superimposed this in like themselves onto their images, which I think looks great. And then yeah, having one thing I also often tell people is if you do have a blog and this person, you know, is doing this well, make sure that the blog is, you know, frequently updated, because often people will prominently display like a blog page. I don't know if I have a example on the top of my head, but there are pages that I've seen recently where you're looking at it and you're like, oh, there's only one blog post here. Oh, this is the one that I was thinking of, where you're just like, oh, from the blog, and there's clearly room for 3 spaces here. So at the very least, make sure that the, you know, that these things are usually populated if you're going to do that. So, okay, I'm going to look at, and I see Shanti, you were saying it looks fine on the phone. Okay, that's cool. It might just be a browser-based thing then. Okay, so I would say my initial impression is that this stuff up here at the top with like the payment options is, well, I guess first of all, it doesn't seem to work, but second of all, I would put that somewhere else, because that's like when I read a page, and also when the algorithm reads a page, like this is the first thing it's going to see. And the first thing you really want them to see is your H1 text. So like in your case, it's this transforming grief. That's what's going to help the algorithm figure out what your website is about. And so like some of this copyright information, I would put at the bottom as well. But I do like your top line navigation. I think that's clear and easy to use. And you're using visuals really prominently. I think that, yeah, I would just put a lot of this stuff like all of your like, you know, copyright text and things like that at the bottom. And I also think that some of these colors could use a little bit more contrast. So, you know, that's basically what I would give in terms of, you know, my feedback on this.
That's weird, because I didn't think my any payment information showed up on my site. I've never seen it, but I'm gonna get that out of there anyway, because
yeah. Totally. Yeah. But I like some of your use of like these animations. And like, yeah, that's what I would say around here. And let's see. Oh, I guess we did this this website already. Okay. Let's see. This is Lynn's page. Yeah, so I really like the, you know, here's another note that I would say. A lot of people, I really like it when people design their website such that most of the content is in the middle, because I would say that the human eye generally, it's like difficult to consume when there's things over here and there's things over here. Like, it's just like there's a lot of space between those two areas, especially when you're on a large screen like I am. So having things centered in the middle, I think, is really good. So like the Order of the Good Death does that really well. All of their, like, they just have like these wide margins on the side. And I think that is easier for people to consume as they're like just like scrolling through and browsing your site. There are a lot of fonts, I think, like being used. But I would say that this is like really, I don't have a lot of feedback on this one. I like I think that maybe this text could be a little bit larger, just like for people who might have difficulty reading font that's this small. but I really like the, use of like font weighting, where you're like, it's very clear what is a heading, like, what is like supposed to have highest prominence in terms of the hierarchy. That's one thing that I'm often like advising people, like make sure that it's very clear what font is like supposed to be read first and what font and like what text is supposed to be read second. So yeah, I'll go to the next one. Oops. Yeah, same thing here. It's like it's good that it's all in the middle. And there's definitely a lot of contrast going on. I personally prefer like having dark backgrounds. I think that is easier to read in like both high and low light settings for people. And so like that's just one thing that I, think about a lot in terms of like where are people most likely, I think, especially when people are viewing websites at night, having an all like 100% white background can be really difficult on your eyes and can cause a lot of eye strain. So yes, I actually really am pro the darker backgrounds. So yeah, and I think that also like, yeah, having a lot of these like videos too, I think that can be really good in terms of if you have videos, like I always really strongly encourage forefronting those videos, like either on the homepage or somewhere prominent in your website. And also like good use of like making sure things are captioned. And one thing that I definitely let people like make sure that people focus on is making sure that their like alternate text for people who are using screen readers is present. Oh, whoops, I did not copy. Cool. So yeah, I also would probably make this a little bit bigger just because like, yeah, it's a little bit difficult for me to read text that's this small. And then any of these like learn more pages, it would be good to also have like a little sitemap at the bottom so that people can find those easily, and for the algorithms to be able to get to those easily too. So yeah, I think those are like all of the, have I worked with doulas with bilingual pages? You know what? I have not done that, and I would love to do that at some point. Probably my guess is it wouldn't really be that different. Like you would just have somewhere on the page, you would have like, a option to view the whole thing in Spanish, and the design itself would look exactly the same, or whatever other language you want to include. Like you would just have all of the exact same content, but like in another language. And there are, what do I mean by closed captions? So closed captions is one thing that is usually something that happens in a video, but I think what I was referring to actually was more alternate text. So, whenever you have an image, it's good to be able to, so like, let me go onto my website and see if I can show what I'm talking about. You can usually basically specify like, this is what the image is of when you're in your website editor. So that's just like an accessibility thing. I don't think I can actually have any good examples at the ready right now. But that's what I mean. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So I think that the main takeaway is that at the end of the day, like it's nothing about, a website is ever that complicated. At the end of the day, it's really just like boxes. It's boxes of text and like images. But the main thing to think about is things like, okay, like, is it big enough? Is it high enough contrast? Are people going to like, what setting are people probably going to be viewing my website in? And what is the hierarchy of the information that I would like to present to them? So, in this, for example, if the like one piece of advice I might give, or feedback I might give for Keely is like, is your number one goal to get people to reach out to you? Because like I would, if that's the case, I would like make the connect button a little bit like more accented than like the other things, because that's really like your call to action that you want them to connect with you. And I would probably put that at the bottom of each page as well. Just so that like, you know, when they reach the bottom, in terms of trying to follow their thought process, it's like, okay, you know, I just went through this piece of content. Like at what point are they going to think to themselves, I think I want to like learn more from this person, or I would like to engage them as my doula, that kind of thing. So yeah, are there any other questions that people have, or just comments?
I have a question about content. I have actually two questions. What do you think about including prices, and how much information is too much? You know, say if you offer a lot of different things.
Yeah. So I am always pro including your prices. And that's obviously like a personal preference for people, but like, I just think it saves people time if you're charging a price that's more than they can afford, that like, they're not going to waste their time reaching out to you if like they have this whole call and at the end they're like, oh, and like, what do you charge? And then like, oh, I can't afford you. I just wasted both of our times. Right. So that's just, you know, I also volunteer for the Funeral Consumers Alliance, and that's literally our number one gripe is that, you know, funeral homes don't post their prices on their websites. So I definitely believe in posting your prices, even if it's something that like is variable. I would just post the price and then explain what variables are involved in your pricing structure, you know, because even that is just helpful for people to be able to understand. And then, sorry, what was your second question?
Oh, just about, it seems like your preference is simple is better. So when it comes to like having to like a lot of different information, especially if you offer a lot of different services.
Oh, yeah. So this is really, applicable to, I think, a lot of the websites that I've seen as I go through like some of the NIDA websites, and like, you know, there's just so many things that some people offer, right? We're like, I'm a thanatologist, I'm a grief doula, I'm like a, you know, like everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would say like you can obviously include all of those things, but I like my number one feedback that I give to people is pick something to at least highlight, right? If you have like, you know, your main service that you want to direct people to, and like, you know, some other secondary services that you don't care as much about, like I do think that there's a little bit of a paradox of choice thing that happens when people are faced with all of these different services, and they're like, you know, how do I decide what I even really need, right?
Right.
So I would say like you can definitely include all of it, but at least highlight one main one to focus on, like, and have it be at the top.
Makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
So does anyone else have any questions for Isabelle?
I do, because we're going to be, a main feature of our website is going to be a directory. So it looks like we're going to use Wix. And I wonder how that works. How complicated is it for doing a lot of it ourselves to put a directory up?
Yeah, sorry about that. Can you guys hear the music in the background? Okay. Okay, so there's a lot that goes into, so that's like that on its face is a simple question, but can also be an involved question depending on how you're building your directory, right? So let me just share my screen again and talk to you a little bit about like, okay, I just have the NIDA directory open. Basically, directories can be like, this is the simplest possible way to do a directory, right? There is no automation involved. You're literally like, they're just literally using like tiles essentially, and with some text and a photo, right? There are ways to automate it, which might make less work on your end, but to actually code those things, it's much more difficult. So sorry, I lost track of what was your original question about the directory?
Oh, well, I was just kind of wondering how they work. Like, we probably would want to be able to post the person's website there like they are here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, is it hard to do?
This is like the way they designed this page is like extremely easy to do.
Okay.
But it involves a lot of manual work. because these are not connected to anything, right? So like if Erica wanted to change something about her directory listing, she would have to email someone and that person has to manually go in and change something about it. So like, you know, I for the National Home Funeral Alliance, we have a much more complicated directory, which I did not build, that, you know, is essentially like these people can like sign into their own directory account and like change everything themselves. So that requires less manual labor on our side, but it's a lot more difficult to code, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think that conversation is to be continued as we
yeah.
because it's is going to take a lot of our time to create, but that's definitely our goal. We
Yeah.
want all of y'all on our directory, so the doulas in Florida have a home, one place that they can be found. Well, since we're talking about directories, I'm going to just share my screen, and this is going to be brief, and then we'll have time for more questions. Let's see. Okay. Okay, so these are doula directories that I've compiled. And so the beginning of the list here, these are all directories that you can become members of. Some of them will ask you to donate a certain amount in order to be listed there. So these first six listings, these are all ones where it doesn't matter where you trained, right? So they obviously want to make sure that you're a certified doula, but anyone from any organization can list their services here. And I have found these to be super useful. You know, Shanti has been, she's been filling that role for us in the state of Florida for a while now. People come to her and she lets people know where we are in the state. So we'll eventually have that on our directory. So we're going to be the piolda.com. And then depending on where you graduated from, each school generally has their own directory, and they're going to make sure that they're highlighting the people that went to their program. So just take a moment to take a screenshot or jot some of these down. And so these are the main ones that you want to look at. And just go ahead and give me a thumbs up when I can stop sharing screen. Yeah, is that good? Okay. We have about 10 more minutes. I have a question, Isabelle, about websites. You know, a lot of our clientele, they're going to be, most often they're a bit older generation that maybe is not so tech savvy. How important is it to still create things like brochures and business cards?
Definitely, yeah, I definitely recommend making brochures because at least here in Philadelphia, like we have 5 like networking groups that meet once a month, and they always, when you go, they always ask me for a pile of brochures. So in terms of just my experience in like, you know, sort of the general elder care ecosystem, that is the main way that probably people will see your content first. So yes, definitely make sure you have a good website. But the brochures I think are really critical.
Thank you for that. Would you also mind letting everyone know how they can reach you?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So what other questions do people have about design or content? Anyone want to share where they're at with things right now, how they're feeling about what they've got going on so far?
Well, I just know with my website, I'm very much a do-it-yourselfer, and I keep going back to it, and I like being able to do it myself because I go back and I tweak, and it's kind of like a work in progress all the time. But getting other people to look at it and give me the feedback is very helpful. And with the Wix, I have trouble sometimes making the mobile app look like it's supposed to.
Yeah.
The computer looks great, and then when I go to the phone, I'm missing a video, or I'm not sure how to navigate that.
And I think in particular, Wix has this very annoying habit of cropping your images for you, so that that's one thing that I get all the time, is that people are like, I want this entire image to show, and it's only showing like, the middle 30% of it. So that is something that is a perennial issue with Wix. And I think Squarespace has some similar issues that happen, but Wix does that quite a lot.
So of those, which do you recommend certain ones as being easier to use or preferable?
Yeah, so I think that the most common one I see people using right now, there's the three main ones I see people use are WordPress, Wix, and Squarespace. And I have a slight preference over like with Wix over Squarespace, just because like the UI I think is a little bit better on the back end when you're editing things. And I think Squarespace, both of them I think are quite difficult when you're using a template to get it to be more customized to something that you want versus like basically something that looks exactly what the template looks like. I think WordPress is a little bit better in terms of the customization, but I do think that the back end is a little bit clunky. So they all kind of have some pros and cons. It really depends on what features you're going for. So like whether or not you're trying to do an online course and embed that, or if you're just trying to do a landing page. If you're just doing a landing page, there's actually like free website builders that I recommend over any of those paid options, because if it's just going to be links and texts and images, like you can do all of that for free. You don't have to get any kind of hosting service except for the domain. So yeah, I see two hands up. Yeah, so Laura.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So two things, I guess. One is you mentioned that if you're just doing text and pictures and things like that, that there's a lot of free websites versus like, are you talking about Canva and Wix are the same more websites? I mean, I bought a domain, but I have no clue how to even get to it or anything. So I'm still working on that. But when you're doing pictures, let's say you're using a Nikon camera, is it better to have RAW or better to just do like the 1080, high definition, whatever? Or is it better to be lower?
I would say, so like, yeah, the trade-off when you're doing images is always that if it's too big an image, it will affect the load time of your website. But if it's too small, it will affect the resolution. So I would say go for as like small an image size that you can while still having it be super high resolution on the largest screen that you can find. That's what I always advise people. So yeah, that's always gonna, depend on the images. But when you say raw, also, I wasn't quite sure if you're talking about like there's a way to take pictures on like a raw setting, which includes all of the information. Okay. I would not use raw images because it has a lot more information than is necessary in them. Definitely edit your photos. Yeah. And William?
I'm curious if you have any advice on logos and building logos and any kind of websites that you think are good places to get logos built out or have branding conversations.
Yeah, so the website that I linked, Dribble, is really good for logos. And so they interest in terms of like inspiration. And then there's a YouTube channel also that I'll put in there that I love if you have Adobe Illustrator, because that's the software that I use for all of my design work. And if you go on YouTube, the person who will show you a lot of those tutorials is called Tutvid. So I'll put that in the presentation right now too. But if you want to do them yourself, I mean, like logos, I would say that like they're very, it's very like you want them to be simple. So I feel like for the most part, like you can get them done really easily if you wanted to do it yourself. But if you, I don't have any particular, other than myself, I don't have any particular people off the top of my head in terms of like people who will do logos for you, but I will link the Tutvid YouTube channel for those of you who might be interested in doing your logo yourself.
Yeah, I have Illustrator. I'm not amazing at it. I definitely, this is the kind of thing where I feel like spending a little money. I didn't know if there's a website like Fiverr or any of those kinds of things you think are good places to go find people for building out logos, because you're going to use it so frequently that it's I think sometimes it's worth it.
Yeah, and I am putting the link to my slide deck in the chat right now. So
Nice.
anybody who wants to get access to that, I just made sure it was unrestricted. That's where all the links are.
Amazing, thank you. So appreciate it today.
Yeah. Any last questions?
So the last one you talked about with logos, Tutvid, what was that?
It's called Tutvid, and it's like a YouTube channel. And it teaches you how to basically like build really simple visuals in Illustrator, which is a paid service. Like it is an Adobe, you do have to pay for it, but in my opinion, it's just so much easier to use than a lot of the other design tools out there.
Can you spell that?
Yeah,
I didn't
I'll put it in the chat. It's just
Okay,
called
great.
Tutvid. Yeah.
Tutvid. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. Well, I feel like there's so much good information here, and I'm glad that we recorded this. Actually, we can go ahead and stop the recording now. Oh, actually, we'll just close out. So I wanted to just thank you all for coming. Our next call is in 1 month. It'll be the first Tuesday of the month at the same time, and the next one is going to be our call number 3, all about marketing and presenting. So really big piece of what we all somehow end up doing as doulas is a lot of education. So getting comfortable with that piece of it as doulas is, I think, more important than we realize. And I can't thank you all enough for showing up for this conversation and for all the beautiful work that you're doing throughout our state. And Isabelle, amazing.